The house looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, neatly trimmed lawn, a dozen children running in and out while the proud father worked in the Air Force Academy and the elegant mother orchestrated a vision of American family perfection. But what if I told you that behind those smiling photographs and Sunday church appearances lay one of the most disturbing hidden tragedies in American history? A family so cursed, so consumed by darkness, that their story would become a window into the secret war between order and chaos, sanity and madness. This is not just the story of a family, it is the anatomy of hidden suffering, a reminder that the darkest prisons are often built inside the mind. In Colorado Springs during the mid-20th century, Donald and Mimi Galvin appeared to embody the American dream. They married after the war, raised 12 children, and projected themselves as role models to their community. They trained falcons, they hosted dinners, they prayed every Sunday. But within those walls, a storm was building, a storm that no religion, no tradition, no medical authority could stop. One by one, their sons began to break. 6 of the 10 boys would descend into schizophrenia, their behavior violent, unpredictable, terrifying. Their sisters lived in fear, huddling in locked rooms while their brothers destroyed furniture, threatened lives, and descended into psychosis. The father distanced himself. The mother clung harder to the illusion of control, and the neighbors never saw what was happening, just a happy large family down the street. But here is what you were never supposed to know. The Galvin family did not just suffer. They became an experiment, a secret battlefield where psychiatrists, priests, and institutions collided, where the narrative of genetic destiny clashed with the whispers of trauma abuse and systemic silence. Their home on Hidden Valley Road was not just a house, it was a lab, oratory of human darkness, a place where every secret about mental illness, family dysfunction, and institutional betrayal converged. The question is simple but terrifying. How can one family produce such concentrated madness? Was it in the blood? Was it in the environment? Or was it something far more sinister? Something no one wanted to speak about? You are about to descend into the shadows of a family history so dark that once you hear it, you can never unknow it. Welcome to the Galvin family story. The truth of the Galvin family cannot be told without first stepping into the silence of Mimi. Galvin, the mother, imagine her holding 12 children together while the walls of her home shook with screams. Imagine her watching as the dream of the perfect family began to collapse one child at a time. Yet, instead of breaking the illusion, she fought harder to maintain it, presenting order to the world. While chaos consumed her private life, Mimi was raised in an era where a woman's worth was judged by her ability to raise a strong, stable family. She believed that if she could just maintain appearances, everything would be fine. So when her sons began to show signs of madness, she hid it behind curtains. She told herself it was a phase. She told the neighbors that boys will be boys. She told her daughters to be quiet about the nightmares unfolding inside their bedrooms. But denial is its own form of violence. Silence became the weapon that cut deeper than any scream. The daughters remember locking themselves in closets, while their brothers pounded on the doors with fists of rage. They remember knives glinting in the dark footsteps in the hall, threats whispered in voices, not their own. They remember their mother insisting that everything was normal, that no one must know what was happening. And what about the father, Donald? He wore the uniform of the Air Force, a man of discipline and honor. But in the house, he distanced himself, detached from the unraveling. He could tame falcons in the field, but he could not tame the shadows devouring his sons. He provided structure, but not safety, order, but not compassion. His silence only deepened the abyss. This family became a mirror of a larger truth, a truth society itself refuses to confront. Mental illness is not just about the brain. It is about the cage of silence families build around it. Institutions looked at the Galvins and saw research potential. Doctors studied them. Priests prayed for them. Neighbors whispered about them. But no one truly stepped into their darkness with compassion. Instead, the Galvins became a symbol, a case file, a hidden secret in the archives of medical history. By the end of the 1960s, the family was drowning in brokenness. 6 sons lost to schizophrenia, the rest of the children fractured by trauma. Every birthday, every Christmas became another reminder that perfection was a lie, and still Mimi refused to let the outside world see the truth. She smiled at church. She waved at neighbors. She carried the image of a proud mother of 12, even as her home became a private asylum. The 1970s turned the Galvin household into something more sinister than a family home. It became a battlefield. Every room carried the echoes of voices, not born from reality. The sons who once laughed together now circled one another with suspicion and rage. One brother believed another was the devil. Another whispered to invisible shadows in the corner. Their childhoods evaporated, replaced by hallucinations, paranoia, and violence. The sisters grew up in a constant state of fear. They were no longer children, but survivors hiding in corners, calculating escape routes from their own brothers. At night, they clutched one another as footsteps echoed through the halls, heavy, uneven, as if stalked by something not entirely human. They were told to pray. But prayers dissolved into screams when knives were drawn, when fists slammed against walls, when windows shattered under the weight of madness. Doctors came and went, prescribing pills that dulled minds but never cured them. Each visit felt less like help and more like experimentation. The Galvin brothers were no longer seen as sons or brothers. They became subjects, data points for a medical puzzle that no one could solve. Words like schizophrenia were stamped on their lives, like a curse sealing their fate. The family became famous in medical circles, but invisible in human compassion. What makes this story darker is how society responded. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. Priests offered prayers, but not protection. Schools whispered about the Galvins as if they were cursed. Their tragedy became gossip fuel for others. But no one stepped inside the storm to help. The Galvins were left to drown in silence, in secrecy, in shame. And yet, amid the horror, there were glimpses of humanity. A few of the brothers experienced moments of clarity, gentle intervals where they expressed remorse, tears, or apologies. But like a candle flickering in a storm, these moments never lasted. They were pulled back into the abyss, leaving their siblings once again scarred by broken promises of normalcy. By the close of the decade, the Galvin family was no longer just another large Catholic household in Colorado Springs. They had become something mythic, whispered about as if their name itself carried disease. They were both feared and pitied, studied and ignored, living proof that sometimes the line between family and asylum is thinner than anyone dares to admit. As the 1980s unfolded, the Galvin family's nightmare reached new levels of despair. The brothers who had once wrestled in the yard and played football in the streets were now consumed by voices that never ceased. They heard commands to harm themselves, to harm others, to destroy everything around them. The home on Hidden Valley Road no longer felt like a shelter. It became a cage of madness where every door creaked with menace and every silence carried the weight of fear. The sisters were the silent witnesses to this chaos. They tiptoed around their own brothers, careful not to trigger the storms that brewed behind their eyes. But the storms always came, and when they did, they were violent. There were nights when fists tore through plaster, when plates shattered like fragile bones against the kitchen tiles, and when screams from upstairs pierced the neighborhood like a siren of human suffering. Outside the walls of their home, the world pretended not to see. Doctors treated the brothers like broken machines, adjusting their minds with trial and error. The church offered consolation but no protection. The neighbors whispered myths of curses and demons rather than facing the harsh truth of mental illness. For the Galvins, stigma was as suffocating as the disease itself. They were trapped in a double prison, one built by madness and another by society's cruelty. But amid the horror, there was something else. A twisted fascination scientists and psychiatrists began to circle the family, recognizing them as a case study, unlike any other. 12 children, 10 sons, and 6 stricken with schizophrenia. For researchers, the Galvins were not just a tragedy, they were a key, a possible roadmap to unlocking the mysteries of the human mind. The family's agony became data, their pain transformed into papers and presentations, and yet while the world studied them, the sisters endured trauma that words can barely capture. They faced abuse, manipulation, and the unbearable burden of growing up in a home where love was buried under layers of violence. Their stories were silenced for decades out of shame, out of fear, out of loyalty to a family name too heavy with suffering to carry. The 1980s marked the point when the Galvins were no longer merely a broken family. They became an experiment, a mirror reflecting not only the brutality of schizophrenia, but also the failure of society to protect the most vulnerable. And in that mirror we see not just the Galvins, but ourselves. Our fear of what we cannot understand, our cruelty toward what we cannot control. By the time the 1990s arrived, the Galvin family was split between hope and despair. Some of the brothers had been institutionalized, their days swallowed by sterile hospital corridors, where their humanity was reduced to charts and dosages. Others drifted aimlessly in and out of the family home, like ghosts unable to escape the orbit of Hidden Valley Road. The sisters had fled, but no matter how far they ran, the echoes of their childhood never left them. The house itself had become a monument to survival. Every corner carried a scar, a dent in the wall from an outburst, a burn on the carpet from a night of rage. It stood not as a home, but as a record of the storms endured within its walls. Yet despite the darkness, there were moments when the family reached for fragments of normalcy, a shared meal. Laughter forced but real, a birthday candle lit with trembling hands. It was in these fragile sparks that the Galvins clung to their humanity. The world outside was beginning to change. Science was turning its gaze more intensely toward the family. For geneticists, the Galvins were the holy grail of mental illness research. 6 sons with schizophrenia in one household offered a rare chance to study the hereditary nature of the disease. Blood samples were taken, stories dissected, and their anguish transformed into medical data. Researchers sought answers, but for the family, those answers came too late. They had already lost too much, and yet the sisters began to find their voices. They spoke of what had been hidden, of the fear of walking on eggshells, every day of the abuse that had been masked under the banner of illness. Their testimonies revealed another truth, that schizophrenia was not the only demon haunting the house on Hidden Valley Road. Silence itself had been a predator preying on their innocence for decades. As the years passed, the Galvins came to embody a chilling paradox. They were both victi, Ms. and pioneers, victims of a relentless disease that shredded their bonds, and pioneers in a medical journey that sought to unravel the darkest mysteries of the human brain. Their suffering paved the way for knowledge that might save others. But for them, salvation never truly came. By the end of the century, the Galvins' story was less about hope and more about endurance. They endured when others would have collapsed. They endured when the world watched them suffer. And in that endurance, they became both a warning and a lesson, a reminder that the cost of understanding the human mind is often paid in blood and silence. As the new millennium dawned, the Galvin family story had already become a whispered legend among researchers and psychiatrists. A family of 12 children, half of them struck by schizophrenia. It was a narrative so rare that it seemed more myth than reality. Yet for the Galvins, it was no myth. It was the weight of their everyday existence carried into the 21st century. The sisters, now older, carried their scars like unhealed wounds. Some had built lives far away, trying to craft identities that were not defined by the shadows of Hidden Valley Road, but the past had a way of following them. Like a ghost, it lingered at every family gathering, every phone call reminding them of the brothers who had vanished into institutions or lost themselves completely to madness. The word family for them was both a source of pride and a haunting reminder of what had been stolen. Meanwhile, science kept circling their story. The Galvins had become subjects of fascination. Their bloodlines were charted, their medical histories combed over by eager researchers searching for genetic markers that could explain the inexplicable. Laboratories turned their suffering into data points, their tragedies into graphs. For the world of psychiatry, they were a breakthrough. For the Galvins themselves, they were simply broken. The cruel irony was that the research findings came too late for those who had suffered most. The brothers, who had once been strong, energetic young men, were now fragile shells, their lives consumed by medication, hallucinations, and the endless cycle of hospitals and relapses. Their mother, Mimi, clung to denial until her last days, insisting that faith could overcome biology. Her belief created both comfort and blindness, shielding her from the full scope of the horror her children endured. But for the sisters, the silence was no longer an option. They began to speak openly, to share the story that had long been buried behind closed doors. Their testimony cracked the veneer of secrecy, exposing not only the devastating impact of schizophrenia, but also the abuse and dysfunction that had festered in the family for decades. They were no longer just survivors. They were witnesses determined to ensure the story would not be forgotten. By the mid-2000s, the Galvin family stood as both cautionary tale and symbol. Their suffering illuminated the dark corridors of mental illness research, and their endurance became a testament to human resilience. Yet within their survival lay a bitter truth. Knowledge came at a price, and for the Galvins that price had been everything they held dear. The story of the Galvin family does not end with tragedy alone. It echoes as a reminder, a warning, and a strange gift to the world. Their pain carved open a door into the mysteries of the human mind, and through that doorway scientists have glimpsed patterns that may one day save countless lives. Yet behind every discovery lies the echo of voices silenced by disease. The cries of brothers who could not escape their fate. In the quiet town of Colorado Springs, the house on Hidden Valley Road still stands ordinary from the outside, yet forever marked by what happened within its walls. Neighbors drive past it, unaware of the weight it carries. A place where laughter once mingled with screams, where dreams collided with delusion, and where a family was split apart by something no one could control. The house is no longer just a home. It has become a monument to the fragility of the human mind. For the sisters, their decision to speak was an act of liberation. They broke the cycle of silence that had defined their childhood. Their voices reached beyond psychiatry textbooks and into the public imagination, reminding the world that mental illness is not a distant, abstract concept, but a force that can devastate families from the inside out. Their courage transformed shame into testimony and secrecy into understanding. But even as science advances, as medications improve, and as genetics unravel new mysteries, the haunting question remains. How much suffering is hidden inside homes, just like the Galvins, places where families carry invisible burdens, where silence reigns and where trauma is passed from one generation to the next? The Galvins were studied because their story was extreme. But what about those who remain unseen, forgotten, and unrecorded? The legacy of the Galvin family is both tragic and necessary. It tells us that progress is born from pain, that discovery often rises from despair, and that silence must eventually give way to truth. Their suffering cannot be undone, but it has ensured that the world will never look at schizophrenia the same way again. So when we speak of the Galvins, we do not just tell the story of a family broken by illness. We tell the story of survival, of resilience, and of knowledge wrested from the darkest corners of human experience. Their secret is no longer hidden, and their tragedy has become a mirror forcing us to confront the fragility of our own minds and the shadowed truths within every family.